If you've ever worked really hard to get things sounding right at sound check, and then when the show or service starts, it doesn't quite sound the same, this video is for you. Things can really change between sound check and the service. And this is a sound source thing where people get excited. It's a physics thing, and it has to do with the Sound Ninja too. So in this video, we're gonna dive in and figure out what you can change about your workflows to get better results and stop spinning your wheels so much. Hey, if we haven't met yet, my name is James and I help worship leaders, sound techs, and church tech directors eliminate the mystery and frustration around sound at church. So if that's you, you found the right place, go ahead and mash that subscribe button. Here's a myth that keeps you from making the changes that you need to make it sound good in the service. Things sounded good earlier, but now I'm not so sure, but I should trust what I did earlier because now I'm not so sure and I don't want to make a mistake in front of everybody. This myth keeps you from changing things that clearly need to be changed, or that you're perceiving need to be changed in the moment. Mixing is a hands-on activity and it's somewhat reactive. We have to adapt to what's sent to us from the stage. So when you're mixing, you should keep your hands on the fader about as much as you would want a bus driver to keep his hands on the wheel. The first thing that changes are our sources, and the most notable one that you're probably familiar with is that vocalists get warmed up. Especially, it's Sunday morning, it's early, they might not have done all their warm-ups before sound check, and so they're a little bit timid and a little bit less clear, we'll say. But then they get warmed up, then they actually get people in front of them to sing along with them, and they get more excited, they remember how to do breath support, they remember how to do all of their techniques to sound good and project their voice. So sometimes you're trying to work really hard to get their vocal clear and loud enough and in front, and maybe even you're fighting some feedback, but then during the service, you've got tons of level, things are compressing too much, and maybe it's even distorting. You want to avoid that, so keep an eye out for that. They might not be fully warmed up, even though they say they're giving you their all and projecting and doing all that good singing stuff. Another thing that could happen is that maybe somebody changed something without communicating about it first. Guitar players or bass players might make an adjustment to their instrument, or they thought during sound check they couldn't hear themselves well enough, so they turned themselves up just a little bit from the source, and suddenly everybody's got a lot more of that input. So what do you do about it? Well, the first thing you can do is just roll with it. Whatever setting you had before, it does not matter because that's not how they sound now. Just roll with it and go with the changes and make a mental note for next time that maybe this might not be the exact same thing between sound check and service. If they're giving you a lot more input, you can raise the threshold on your compressor so that that compression isn't pushing down and clamping down on it so much so that it becomes a distraction or it sounds smaller. You do have permission to change the EQ between sound check and service. Just do it carefully and slowly and methodically, and please don't boost and sweep. That's really distracting. And of course, move the fader. Put it in the right spot. That's why they're there, and we don't have knobs for everything, so that we can actually ride it up and down with the music. The other thing you can do is to encourage your team to play and sing more professionally. So singers get warmed up in the car on the way to church, and guitar players and bass players, they finalize their settings during rehearsal and don't change it without communicating first. And even then, how much of a change do you really need to make? Probably not that much. Get it locked in and do your best to be consistent in giving great tone to the sound tech. And finally, during rehearsal, actually play with the right intensity and energy. Yes, I know that most musicians are not morning people, but it takes discipline to do things the right way. Sometimes you just have to push through it and play with your energy even when you don't want to. The second big change that you'll run into between sound check and service is that the acoustics change when people arrive in the room, and there's a few different reasons for this. I call people hot water bags because we're 70% water and 98 degrees. Sounds like a hot water bag to me. What this does is people soak up sound. So sometimes stuff that's ringing out in the low mids that makes things not so clear tend to clear up and tighten up when you get people in the room. Another thing that hot water bags do when they get all together is they create heat waves that rise up. This will actually bend high frequencies up, especially if you're back in the room. You might not hear high frequencies as clearly as you did during sound check. Plus, you've added another sound source into your acoustic environment. People singing, and that's the point. We want people to sing, and we're not surprised when they do sing, but things are going to have to change to accommodate that. Maybe you need more of that lead vocal than you had before, so you have to push that up. Maybe maybe people are singing the melody so strongly that it sounds good to boost up the background singers and the harmony parts, so that the melody that is now much stronger gets complemented by those harmony parts. On a side note, I think this is why a lot of broadcast mixes have too much harmony parts and not enough melody, because the person mixing, if they're mixing front of house at the same time, are hearing the sound source of all those people in the room singing the melody. So to them it sounds balanced where the harmony parts are higher, but in actuality, on the stream, the harmony parts are drowning out the melody. Another way to respond to this is to know that if you're having problems with your vocals in the low mids during sound check, it might clean up when you get people in the room, so don't stress out about it and cut all the living daylights out of it so then it's too thin when people come in. No, there's going to have to be some adjusting, and just do your best. If your sound booth is in the back of the room and there's a long distance between you and the speakers, know that your mix might get duller as a bunch of people crowd in there. You could try to compensate by adding more high frequencies in your mix, but you've got to remember the people in the front row aren't getting those frequencies bent away from them, so they might get a mix that's too bright while the mix back by you might be too dull. It's just one of those things where you have to shoot for the happy medium so that you don't blow anybody away and you still get all the intelligibility that you need. Now, another thing is you could consider adding a little bit more reverb if the mix is feeling a touch dry. But honestly, I don't get super picky about my reverbs in a live environment. So if you're that OCD and you want to go for it, great. But me personally, I'm not dialing in my reverbs that closely with balancing the tone really precisely. I just want to get a little extra tail on there and make it feel spacious. Another thing to remember is that your time-based effects like reverb and delay are going to sound a lot brighter coming off the board than they are going to be reaching your ears. So if you're sending your mix to front of house and you're sending it to broadcast too, you might consider taming down those effects returns a little bit more going to the broadcast send. I don't know how many times I've listened back to a board mix and thought, good gracious, that is a really bright delay. Why would I do that? But it happens. So now you know, and you can prepare for it. The third thing you might run into are perception changes. And the first one we'll talk about is ear fatigue. Now, most of you are not running loud enough and long enough to get to the point where you're getting actual temporary threshold shift, or the very beginning stages of noise-induced hearing loss. But if your church likes to push it, and you've got a long rehearsal, and you've got 3 or 4 services throughout the day, you're probably exposed to more noise than is safe for you in a given amount of time. Oh, and it's worse if your drummer isn't in a fishbowl. If your leadership team in your congregation likes to be on the edge of it being really loud, you might try to live in that space during rehearsal where it's like really pushing it and giving you that intensity that you like. But the problem is you get used to that, and so then if you're not careful, you can end up pushing that up a little bit more, and then the edge wears off, and then you push it up a little bit more and the edge wears off, and suddenly you're very, very loud without feeling like it's very loud. So what do you do about that? Well, you have to be mindful about how loud it is during rehearsal and sound check, and sometimes if the band will allow it, meaning they can hear well enough, you can turn off the PA at front of house for rehearsal, or at least turn it down significantly so that you're not exposing yourself to those loud sounds for so long. However, this might mess with the way that the crowd mics or ambient mics, or the way that they're feeling the room energy come back. That might throw them off, so you'll have to be careful when trying that. But if it saves your hearing, it's worth trying. Another thing to do is to try mixing with earplugs. And I personally like these mixing earplugs from Etymotic Research. They bring down the levels by about 15 or 20 dB, but they do it across the board, so you're not ending up with a bunch of muffled sounds. It actually sounds about the same, just at a quieter level. Some people might chide you for being the sound tech and using earplugs, but you're trying to get the levels that your leadership team wants, and you're there for a lot longer than they are, so you're exposed to more than they are. So it makes sense that you're protecting your hearing because you're serving in that capacity. Another common change in perception is brain fatigue. And honestly, there is only so many decisions that we can make in a certain day. Sometimes you can be EQing something and not really hear the changes anymore, and everything just kind of sounds the same. It's all kind of mushy. This is not necessarily your ears getting tired on a physiology level. It's more your brain and your decision making running out of calories, and it just kind of goes into shutdown mode. So what do you do about that? Well, I try to make as many decisions as I can before the day when I'm mixing for a long time. This means all the input patch, all the routing, all the console setup, everything that I can do that doesn't require the band to be there, I'm gonna do before the band gets there. If you're tired in the middle of it and you need a break, step out if you can. If things have to keep going, have an assistant nearby that can cover for you and make any changes that need to be made. But if you've got to step out to get your brain in the right space, do what you got to do. Make sure that you're fed well and not over caffeinated. Your brain actually consumes a lot of calories doing thinking, and your gut might not say that, but it actually happens. So if you've got the proper nutrition, you're more likely to think more clearly throughout the day, and you can't substitute that with caffeine. I mean, I love coffee and I love caffeine, but it doesn't do the same thing. Finally, stop EQing and tweaking things if you can't hear the changes. Just trust yourself that you'll come back to it later and everything will be okay. You don't want to mess something up because you did something when you were too tired. So hopefully now you're more equipped to make great mixing decisions and stop doing the things that trip you up and know what's coming at you between your rehearsal and sound check and the service. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button, mash subscribe if you haven't already, and remember, it's all about the low end, avoid the sound tech solo, and nobody leaves church humming the kick drum. We'll see you back here next time on Attaway Audio.